number of items from the Torah. And if you have a malva and a lova who are both holding on to the document, each saying that it's really mine, the malva saying that I have not yet collected, the lova saying that I did collect. So there's a machlokes between Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yochanan as to what, how you divide it and what you actually do. So just to briefly recount, according to Rabbi Eliezer, and this is all the Rabbi Shiur ben Gamliel, who says that anytime two people hold on to a contract, you have to split it because of the Mishnah Shnai Motion Batalis, that two people holding on, you have to split. Unlike Rebbe, who in some cases says that you don't split it, Shiur ben Gamliel says you split it. So so Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yochanan have a machlokes, and without reviewing every particular part, we wound up saying that Rabbi Yochanan agrees with Rabbi Eliezer. There really isn't a machlokes, and they both agree that if the malva and the lova are holding on to separate parts of the document, one the toref, one the tofes, that each one takes that portion of the document, and then what they're not holding, you divide. But if they're each holding a part of the toref and each holding a part of the tofes, you split the toref and the tofes. Okay, that was the machlokes, and Rabbi Yochanan agreed to it. Frag the Gemara, if that's the case, then why do you need Rabbi Yochanan? What's Rabbi Yochanan coming to tell us if he totally agrees with Rabbi Eliezer? So the Gemara says, and that's what we concluded last week, that Rabbi Yochanan gives us a chiddush, and the chiddush is that if neither of them are holding the Torah for the Tofes, they're each holding a separate part, but one is closer to the Torah than the other, and the one who's closer to the Torah takes the position that I should get the whole Torah because I'm closer to it, and therefore I control. More answers no, that the other person can say no, that he argues on that, and Rabbi Yochanan comes to tell us yachloku, that proximity to the Torah is not an argument, and that if a person is holding on to the Torah, or I should say, if a person is holding on to the Torah and the other person holding on to the Tofes, you split it 50-50, even though one may be an inch closer to the actual Torah itself. Okay, now, using that as the springboard, we're going to start with this morning, about maybe 8 or 10 lines from the bottom. Amalei Rav Acha Medifta Ravina. So Rav Acha Medifta said to Ravina, based on what we've just discussed now, according to Rabbi Elazar and Rabbi Yochanan, by the way. But we say Rabbi Elazar because Rabbi Elazar is the Beferish Amanda Omer. According to both of them, if one person is holding to the Torah and the other person is holding to the Tofes, what do we say? We say that each one takes their respective part. Frek the Gemara, Lamalei. What's the point of this argument? What we're saying here, a malva and a lova come to Bezdin, and the malva says, you owe me the $100. The lova says, I paid you. Each one is holding on to a different portion of the document. One is the Torah, one is the Tofes, and they want the Bezdin to determine who controls the document and who owes whom the loan. Either the malva says, you owe me, or the lova says, I don't. Frek the Gemara Lamali. What's the argument here? This paper is nothing more than the cork on a bottle. What is the lova possibly going to say here? No, that it's according. If, in other words, what is there to split? If the document says, and it says it, by the way, in the Torah and in the Tofes, if the document is going to say that Reuven the malva lent Shimon the lova money, and he owes him the money, and lova, and so the lova owes him the money. So what are we going to say here? Split it. But the document itself is what's going to control, and the document says the lova owes the malva $100. So the kasha here is this whole document this whole machlokes seems to be nothing more than an exercise in discussion. Lamaisa, what's the chiluk? The lova owes the money the malva $100. What are we going to get out of this? So this piece of paper. It's a nice argument. Take it, roll it up, put it into the bottle, and use it as a stopper. What's the point? In other words, the Gemara, as we have seen in other cases, uses sarcasm sometimes to make its point. What's the point of the whole discussion? The document controls, or the document is around and says the lova owes the malva $100. So my nafkamina. That's the kasha. When we get to the bottom of it, what's the chiluk? So we touched on something last week, and we're going to discuss it now as to what the chiluk is, as to why we even consider the lova as having any sort of foothold here. Okay, there's nothing to be gained. Says the Gemara, Amalei ladame. Ladame, what does that mean, ladame? Let's look at Rashi. So one Rashi back, the Kotar Metzoi, Umaru Machado, Umar Machado Velo Pligi. This has to do with the previous what we said last week. Ladame, Malin Bedamin, we evaluate monetarily Kama Toref Yafa Min HaTofes. How much the Toref is better than the Tofes. In other words, let's say the Malva, and this of course is the Malva is holding the Toref, which is what the essential Iker part of the contract, and the Lova is holding the Tofes, and the Malva comes in and says, I'm collecting on my document. So what we do is we don't split the document physically, which is what we're thinking, oh, we'll rip up the document, each one gets a half of the document. No, it doesn't mean physically the document. It means we evaluate the value of what the Torah is versus the value of the Tofes. Okay, so maybe that makes some sense. What does that mean? The Omar Hochi Shtora de Ispezman Kameshove. Remember, the Torah has a date. The Tofes does not have a date. So we're going to say as follows. Shtora de Ispezman, the part of the shtar, the Torah, that has the date, Kameshove. How much is that worth? The less Bezman, Kameshove. And the Tofes, which does not have the date, how much is that worth? So we're going to say as follows. The Isbezman, the part that has a date, Govim Mishibode, you can collect from Mishubodim, Nechasim Mishubodim. We'll see what that is in a minute. The Idach and the other part, Lo Gove Mishibode. The person holding the Tofes cannot collect from the Nechasim Mishubodim. So therefore, one has a greater value. All right, so let's take a step. Let's understand what we're saying. There's something called Nechasim Mishubodim. Today, for instance, we would say that if Reuven wrote Shimon a contract, and Shimon wanted collateral, Reuven wanted collateral. So Shimon said, you know what? I have a field, and that field is certainly worth $100. I'm going to give you that collateral for the loan. So if I can't pay you the loan, you'll take from the collateral. So what do we say? Very good. Now Reuven has collateral. He knows where to go to collect $100. Now, let's just say the shtar has a date. The shtar says Rosh Chodesh Tammuz. Okay, tomorrow is Rosh Chodesh Tammuz. The shtar said Rosh Chodesh Tammuz. Now, Reuven goes to Shimon and he says, give him $100. He says, I'm sorry, I don't have it. So I'm going to collect from your field. Oh, no, you can't collect from my field because I sold that field. I sold it. Really? When did you sell it? Now we have to go to the date. Because if the sale was prior to Rosh Chodesh Tammuz, Reuven's out of luck. That field was sold before the date of the shtar, and Shimon could not have made that property collateral. And let's say we're now on Rosh Chodesh Elul, okay? So we're looking back. It's a look back, and the date of the sale was Daled Tammuz. On the fourth day of Tammuz, he sold it. So when you wrote that shtar on Rosh Chodesh Tammuz, that land was was valuable land towards the loan. Absolutely. So now Reuben can go to Levi, who bought the land but didn't know anything about the transaction, and says, Levi, I have a shtar here that says that this land is pledged as collateral to my loan. So Levi's going to argue, but he's not going to have a winning argument because the land is pledged. That's called nechosim mishubadim. In other words, property that is indentured. It's otherwise promised. So now we see an afkamina. If you have the part of the shtar that has a date, that date is all critical as to whether or not you can go and collect from the chosim mishubadim. So the value of that part of the shtar is far greater because it's worth the whole $100. If you have the part of the shtar that has no date, how are you going to know when that property was sold? You can't go to Levi and say, Levi, I'm collecting. He says, show me a document that says that I didn't buy the property properly. And he can't do it because he has no date. So now we understand when the Gemara says, you look at the value of the Torah and the value of the Tofes, and you say, who's got the greater value? The person with the greater value has to be paid the amount of that value, and then you divide it 50-50. So for instance, let's just take an example. Let's say the loan was for $200 and the property was valued $100. So the person with the Torah comes in and says, I've got a Torah, I've got a date. The date says, Chodesh Tammuz. Oh, really? Now you can go collect from that property. So that $100 already belongs to the Malveh. We still have another $100 to fight over because it was a $200 loan. So under that circumstance, the Malveh gets $150. He gets $100 on the collateral. But you still split the actual contract 50-50. So what's left of the contract is only 100 because the 100 was already taken from the collateral. So that's where it becomes important to have the Torah, and therefore the Gemara is right in having this discussion. So when Rav Badifta asked Ravina, my nafkamina, what does the debtor get? He gets at least that he doesn't owe $200. In other words, he can get 50. He can't get 100. He can get 50 because the Malveh gets that on the other $100. That's what the Gemara is telling us. Yeah.
Rabbi, is there something missing here when the one who borrows has an obligation inherently not to sell anything that he put up for collateral? So how do we let that go through without some protection that the borrower will not do something like this?
Well, okay. So firstly, he's not right. Of course, he's not right in doing it. But the protection is that you have the date. And by the way, this happens in real life. I mean, where transactions happen. Someone may have either forgotten that it was pledged, or he thought, no, this property wasn't pledged, that property was pledged. Let's say it was an honest mistake. It may not have been, Jay. It may have actually been an effort to undermine that star. But let's just say that it wasn't, that it was accidental, and now he's coming to collect. First of all, Shimon the borrower could have said, you know what, I pledged this property, but I've got so much money in the bank. What am I worrying about this property? I'm getting a great price on this property. Let me sell it today. Misfortune comes and he doesn't have any more money in the bank. So he didn't intentionally. The fact that you pledge a property doesn't necessarily mean that anybody's going to collect on that property. So he fully expected, he was a tzaddik and he had no problem repaying. And he took the property and he sold it. Now, when he unfortunately doesn't have the money to repay, they're going to collect on that property. He says, oh my goodness, I sold that property. So the shtar, assuming he says, well, I don't know when I sold it, the shtar will tell us there's a shtar on the property. And that's why this loan document is so critically important, because the date is telling us whatever happens subsequent it takes a back seat to the priority of the shtar. So it could have been totally innocent. He had no havamina to cheat, but he had a great price on the property and he lost his money. Yeah.
Rabbi, this is Yale.
Well,
what I find interesting in this entire discussion is that clearly an undated document is valid. In other words, the fact that there's no date to it and you have no idea if this was done recently or 10 years ago, it's a valid document. We're just saying if there's a date, then it can go against, encumbered property if there's no date. But even an undated document is a valid document.
Correct. In other words, an undated document still has validity. And again, you remember that we said that Rabbi Yossi was the one who he may have instituted into the argument the most critical aspect of this by saying that clearly a document that is alive is, in other words, that isn't ripped up or canceled is a good document. So that's an important chiddush that, you know what, cancel the document, rip it up, get rid of it, ksuba, shtar, whatever it is. Otherwise, it can last for a very long time. You're absolutely correct.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Menashe, you had a question.
Yeah, two things. Number one is it seems like this is almost the reason why we have title searches nowadays, to make sure that there aren't any outstanding liens on a property.
Correct. Absolutely correct.
The second thing is, couldn't we have actually, though, I know we're talking really, right now we're talking the date the shtar was written, but there could also be another date on there, which could affect another one, would be if it says, Ruvain's borrowing $100 from Shimon on January, the Rosh Chodesh Tammuz, and he agrees to pay it back by Rosh Chodesh Elul. Or would you not have that second date on there?
If those were the terms, if that was how the parties agreed on the deal, then you would have a second date. Correct.
Yeah.
Right. But again, now, so we're past Rosh Chodesh Elul, right? In other words, we're past Rosh Chodesh Elul, and the machlokes is that he pay him on Rosh Chodesh Elul, right? So now Rosh Chodesh Elul, so both dates can be material. That's correct. The first date could be material for the Chosim Mishubadim, right? But so let's just say, let's just say that Rosh Chodesh Tammuz was the sale, and you have to pay by Rosh Chodesh Elul. But if you had not, and there was no discussion about another property. Comes Rosh Chodesh Elul, he hasn't paid. So Reuben's going to go to Shimon and say, Shimon, you didn't pay me the $100. I want to collect from your nechasim. It doesn't have to say in the shtar that he's pledging the collateral. It doesn't have to say it in the shtar. He goes and he says, I want you to pay me. I want to take from the property. I know you have a property. I want to take it. He says, oh, really? I sold that property on Chav Zayin Tammuz. Chav Zayin Tammuz? So wait a minute. You were supposed to pay me by Rosh Chodesh Elul. So now becomes an interesting question. Does Reuven have any claim on that shtar? Does he have any claim on that shtar? Because there wasn't an outstanding language in the shtar that says you have a field which I'm going to claim. It doesn't say that. So in other words, he has no claim on it. If the land would be unencumbered on Rosh Chodesh Elul or Beis Elul, then he would say, I want to come to your land. But if it's already encumbered and he says, but wait a minute, I had a shtar as of Rosh Chodesh Tammuz, I should have first claim on that land, then he wouldn't have claim on that land because that land was not encumbered, right? It wasn't the Chosim Mishubadim.
Right, so, and the borrower would claim, well, yes, I sold it on the 27th of Tammuz, but I was expecting to get some other money. I was going to use that money to pay you back. I was going to use the money from the land to pay you back, but then I end up having other expenses, and now I don't have the money or the land.
Right. So in that scenario, the Reuven, the Malva would not have any recourse to go to that property because that wasn't the Chosim Mishubadim. It was not indentured. It wasn't encumbered at the time of the
right. Whereas if on Beis Elul, he didn't go back and pay the money on Rosh Chodesh Elul like it was supposed to. Beis Elul, he sells the land and spends the money. Then the lender could come back to him and say, but wait a minute, you had no right to sell that land to somebody else and take the money. That land should go to me, or the proceeds should go to me, and you're in trouble.
On base Elul, he would be able to come back and have that time. Right. Because it was sold after the date that he was supposed to have received. Right. All right. So let's look at Rashi. Shtora de isbeis man kameshovet. The Toref odif mitofes. The Toref is better. The isbei mokam hazman. It has a date. The ilusham hamalva havalova v'hamo is kosvin af betofes. L'chayra, you make an argument. What difference does it make? It says the name of the malva, the lova, the amount of money in the tofes. We said last week that the tofes summarizes, or at the end of the tofes, in some ways the tofes is a little bit stronger because at the end of the document, first of all, it has the witness's signature, which we talked about last week. We'll review that in a minute. But it summarizes the document. So the summary of the document tells us everything clearly. So why is it not better? B'shita achrona, b'hu iker. In other words, listen to this. On the last line of the document is the summary of the document. What happens if the first part of the document says Reuven lent Shimon $100, and in the tofes at the end of the document it says Reuven lent Shimon $200. $200. So look what he says. Other than the date, okay, the date we know is in the first part of it. So he says Shetzarach Laksa in Yonah shall start B'shita Achrona v'hu Iker. V'hu Iker, says Rashi. The summary of the facts in the tofes at the end of the shtar, that's the main thing. Kidetnan kosabol mamala moneh. If what I just said, if you wrote in the beginning of the shtar that he lent him 100, mamato mosayim, in the bottom it says 200, mamala mosayim v'lamato moneh, or vice versa. Hakol holech acher hatachton. The value of this loan goes after what's at the bottom of the shtar. So l'chayra, we see the tofes has something over the Torah. Aval zman, the time, lo mahader. Therefore, that only appears once. It appears at the top, and that's why that date is so critical, because it tells us about Mechosim B'Shabbatim. But you're right. If there is a conflict in the shtar between what amounts were loaned, then the tofes, the bottom line, is what counts, right? The imishum chasimis edim, and if you're going to make another argument, you know why the tofes is really better, because it has the witness's signature, which we talked about. Who tachas tofes is at the very bottom under the tofes. For Israel, Rabbi Shimon Gamliel, we know Rabbi Shimon Gamliel says mode b'shtar shv'kosfu. If the loveh admits this is a valid shtar, this isn't a fake shtar, ein tzarich l'kaimo. You don't have to certify the edim. In this case, there is no machlokus between the malva and lova coming into Bezdin. Is it a valid loan document? Of course, it's a valid loan document. The argument is whether it was paid or not. Rabbi Shimon Gamliel is of the view, arguing on Rebbe, that moda b'shtashikosu ein tzarich l'kaimo. So forget about the witnesses' signatures. Nobody has to certify. We don't need a notary. We don't need anything. So the signature, while it's important, is now irrelevant. The amount is not in dispute in this case. And what's the difference? The date. And the date's in the Torah. So the value of the shtar goes after the Torah, like we just said. Now, what's interesting, which again, we didn't discuss it in great detail, is, but you see the Tofes has strength, because the Tofes recounts all the facts, is the bottom line, and to the extent that there's any conflict in the documents other than the date, the Tofes controls. But our Gemara says here, but that doesn't increase the value. It makes a difference, $100, $200. Of course, it makes a difference what the amount of the shtar is. But what's the driving force here? When? When did it all happen? And that can only be controlled by the Torah. So under this circumstance, the Gemara tells us very clearly that this whole discussion between Rebbe or Shimon Gamliel and that whole inyan has to do with values, not with the paper it's written on. We're not finished yet because there is a machlokes here, but that's how Rashi interprets it. It's very important that the value of the star is what we're really discussing, because that controls who owes who money. And therefore, the kasha, the Rav Acha Badifta asked, it's a piece of paper, use it for a cork. What value does it have? The answer is it has great value, because the whole star taken as a whole, especially in looking at the date, can make the difference as to whether someone can collect from collateral that has been pledged, or not. All right. So that's where we are in the Gemara, and Rashi gives us a clear explanation. So now we know everything we need to know about shtaris. Is when you write a shtar, first of all, you write the date, write all the facts, you recite everything. Now, today, our shtaris are sometimes a little bit different. And Yale, who may draft shtaris, who may draft documents, can tell us that today, very often, the signature on the shtar is with a date. So it says, on Rosh Chodesh Tammuz, Reuven lent Shimon $100, etc., etc., etc. The place, everything else. The body is whereas, tells us all the Chedushim. At the end, it summarizes Reuven lent Shimon $100, etc. Okay, Yosef ben Shimon and Yechiel ben Mechoel signed the document, and right next to their signature is a date. Now, the emes is that date doesn't necessarily have to be the same date as the first date, because when we write shtaris, we write the date of the shtar. The witnesses could sign a day later. The witnesses, if you put a date. Now, in those days, obviously, they didn't put a date. But today, taking our time today and taking this Gemara, overlaying it on our contracts, now you have a different inyan, because today you have a date on the shtar. So the kasha is, so the real question is, to your point, Menashe, what happens if someone signs, it says on Rosh Chodesh Tammuz, I'm going to lend you money, right? So that now means that he owes him the money, and he pledges, let's say, he pledges his property as collateral, and everything is fine and good. Now, and then the shtar itself wasn't signed for 3 days because he couldn't find 2 impartial items. You can't have a karev. All he had around him was family. The family couldn't sign the shtar. You had to have someone else sign the shtar. He finally found 2 witnesses and brought them in 3 days later. Now, hypothetically, what happens if that property was sold on Beis Tammuz? Sold the property on Beis Tammuz. Gimel Tammuz, the Eidim signed, and the date of the contract was Rosh Chodesh Tammuz. So, query, where are we?
Question. In that situation, when does the money change? When does the loan change hands? Does it change hands when they first draw up the document, or does it change hands once the final relevant person, the aid or whatever, signs off on it?
So that's a very, very important question, because and so that may have been one of the reasons they didn't date the witnesses, because you want to have one date unless it's the same date and it lines up. If it doesn't line up, you're absolutely right. Now we have that shaila, when is the date of the shtar? So l'chayra, and I will say that l'chayra, the date that's on the shtar is the operative date. If the witnesses sign, it's lamafreya from the date of the shtar. The shtar says Rosh Chodesh Tammuz. They didn't sign till Gimel Tammuz. On Gimel Tammuz, they're validating that on Rosh Chodesh Tammuz, Shimon loaned $100 to Reuben, $100 to Shimon. That's, again, maybe specifically they didn't date it, but today, that would be the circumstance. The operative date, unless it says, which it never does, that the witness's signature. What it does say in today's, to make it more confusing, is very often in our shtaris, it says, this shtar will be valid the date of the latest signature between the parties. That it does say on shtaris. So if Shimon signed it on Rosh Chodesh Tammuz, he then sent it to Reuben, vice versa, Reuben, and then he sent it to Shimon. Shimon didn't get around to signing it until Gimel Tammuz. If the shtar had that clause that even though the header said Rosh Chodesh Tammuz, and Reuven signed it with Chodesh Tammuz. Shimon didn't sign it until Gimel Tammuz. If that's what it had said, which it didn't, then we would have this situation where if the property was sold based Tammuz, then he can't collect it as collateral because the star was not operative until Gimel Tammuz. Again, with our good fortune and the way it was written in those days, there wasn't a second date. I'm just saying that today it muddies the waters further because today you have dates and fine and all these because sometimes it could take maybe 2 weeks for a star to become operative. And today we're more makbid that the star should not go, the document should not become valid until everybody has signed. What happens if he writes the star, signs it, and then Shimon gets the star and he says, wait a minute, I didn't agree to this. We got to make a change. They make a change, he signs it, and then what? It's going to be the mafreya of the date of the original contract? That wouldn't be right. That wouldn't be fair. So all these complications come up, which maybe they didn't have in those days because the parties may have been together, sitting in one room, everyone signed and fine. But you can see with the halacha has to be stretched because if you have different circumstances at different times, then you have a problem. How do you deal with it? Anyway, it's an aside, but it's important to think about all of those things. But here at the time of the Gemara, that wasn't the problem. They signed, and once they signed, that was the operative date. Now we know from the standpoint of the Chasam B'Shubadim, that's the date. There is no machlekes. All right. So I said before that Rashi interprets, and we say that Dome means the value of the star. So right now, not everybody seems to agree to that. Okay, there seems to be a position here that Shnaim Oxim B'Talis doesn't mean value. It means literally you take the talis and you rip it in half, right? Because according to this Gemara, Shnaim Oxim B'Talis doesn't mean you rip it. It means you take the talis, it's valued at $100. Okay, one person takes the talis, another person has to pay him $50. That makes sense, right? We know we do that all the time. You don't take a good object and destroy it. So the Gemara so the Gemara here is saying when it says dameh, it means money all the time. Break the Gemara. So now the Gemara says as follows. Break the Gemara. Oh, sorry. So let's just finish. So the Gemara says Yarv leheich the beni. So from the previous Gemara, whoever is holding on to it, he holds on to the shtar and gives the other person money. So that's the conclusion of what dameh means, is that one person holds it, the other person gets the money via chloku. Right? The Gemara via chloku named amran. So therefore we're going to extrapolate that in our Mishnah via chloku, when it says shnamos metal via chloku, nami the amran ladami, that it also means that they divided according to the monetary value of the talis. The ilo tema hachi, because if you don't say that way and you mean you rip it up, shnai mochsim batalis, hachenami the palge, that you split it for afsadahe. So the Gemara can't fathom that you would take a perfectly good talis and rip it up and destroy it. That doesn't make sense. Baltashkis. Can't take a talis and destroy it and rip it up for no good reason. So in other words, the Gemara is saying it has to be dameh, because if it's not dameh, how do you interpret shnai mochsim batalis? So like the Gemara at the bottom of Zion Amid Beis, lo kasha, not a kasha, right? Top of Chesam and Aleph. The Chazeh Miktanin, because Baruch Hashem, we have big talasim, right? So if you split up the talis in half, then each half can go to a cotton. In other words, obviously you're going to have to add 2 tzitzis because you're splitting up the 4 tzitzis into 2. You need 2 more. So you go to the bookstore, you go to the tzitzis maker. He puts on 2 more tzitzis. Now you have 2 talasim for 2 young boys. Okay, so you see that they wore maybe bar mitzvah, not bar mitzvah. They wore talasim. So it's not a raya that you have to say it means dameh. It could mean literally, physically splitting the talis, and you give it to children. The Omar Rava, Rava says. Remember, we had another Rava said, what happens if you have a talis that has gold lace through the talis. And we talked about that there are, especially for Hasidim or Rebbes, there are many talesim that have an atara, and also in the middle of the talis you have a silver patch. A silver patch in the middle of the talis. I see Hasidic Rabbanim with these very elaborate talesim. What do you do? So the Gemara there discussed how you split it. One says I should get it because it's on my side, whatever. But you split it. Everything is split. That if you have a gold talus that has then hachinam de palik, you also split it. Frank the Gemara ba'afsada. How could you take a talus that has a silver lining in the middle and split it? And for the Gemara lokasha the chazal of melachim. So a regular talus that you split, you give it to the katanim. A talus with a fancy gold or silver lining, you give it to the bnei malachim, to the children of the king, to the children of the Rebbe, so that they can wear a smaller talus also with a silver lining. They get used to the fact that they have a silver lining and they start young. So in other words, the Gemara is saying it's not a kasha because you can always use the talus. Therefore, you can't take the position that it means money. It means physically splitting it. Okay? So he brings another proof, a raya to that. We learned if two people are riding on a behema and they come to Bezin, each one says the behema is mine, what do? We split the behema. You kill it. Frank the Gemara afsada. It's baltashes. What do you mean you split it? Why would you split it? You have a donkey, a horse, or any other animal. Why would you split it? Zak the Gemara. If it's a cow or a sheep or a goat and you split it, no problem. Shecht it, split it in half. He takes a couple steaks. He takes a couple steaks. Everybody goes home happy. Ella Tomeh. But if you have a horse or a donkey or some other unclean animal, it's what are you going to do with a half a horse? I mean, you can't eat it. You can't do anything with it. It immediately loses a substantial amount of its value. A live horse is the stakes are high, right? So in other words, it loses a lot of value. Ele ladami. Therefore, the Gemara concludes it has to mean that in that case with the horse, if it's worth $100, you split the horse. One person takes the horse. One person takes the money. Achenami ladami. So here also it means ladami. So you see the back and forth that ladami is really the right answer. Obviously, we had a havamina that with the shnai machzon, you can split it, you can tear it, you can do it. But the emes is that you really take the object and you value it and you make a valuation. And then now if they have a machlokes and who gets the talus because it's an heirloom or who gets the money, all right. So now we have to figure that one out. But we don't necessarily rip it up and take it away. Okay.
So now, question. One question. So the interesting thing with to take the animal, shecht it and split it, is that if you have a non-kosher animal, then you sell it or whatever. You know what the value is going to be. With a kosher animal, you might have an animal that's good as an ox that's good as a work animal. It's worth a certain amount. And now you're going to sell it for the meat, and you can say, okay, it's worth close to whatever, and we'll split it. Fine. Then you shecht it, and you examine it, and you find that it turns out to treifa. You had no way of knowing that before you shechted it. And now all of a sudden it went from a value of $200, enough to pay off the loan or to split whatever, or to split the value. No, it's not a loan here. Whatever. To split the value, it's a certain amount. And now all of a sudden, by shechting it, it's now dropped in value. You thought it was going to be $200, and now it's only $100. Whereas if you'd kept it and sold it as a work animal, it would have been $150. You get all kinds of different.
Right. So again, you're right. Under that circumstance, in that havamina, you have to ask what were they thinking, because of all of those possibilities. Our good fortune at the end of the day, it means money. So, but you're right that if there is a risk. There is a risk. But unless he said, look, this animal, I have no havamin of really shechting. I want to use it as a work animal. So as a work animal, it's worth $200. So we split it, and somehow they work it out that it's 100 each. But you're right. If he then takes the animal and he wants to shecht it, then it's his chesaron. I mean, that's a gamble. That's a gamble. But all right. So life isn't always fair. You try to make it as fair as possible, but it isn't always fair. So anyway, Lamaisa, the good news is that the maskana is that it's ledame, and in all those cases, we don't roll the dice. We just say that this is a work animal, or it's a horse, or even whatever it happens to be, and we split it that way. All right. So that's the maskana. Now we'll start into a new sugya, fascinating sugya that has, there's a lot of machshava in this. There's a lot of nuances to what we're about to start. Omer Rami Bar Chama. So we're finished with the machlekes of Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yochanan and in Rabbi Shimon Gamliel. And now we're going to go back to the Mishnah. The Mishnah says, that two people fall onto the talis, they come to Bezin, each one gets a hat. Zoysa Maris. Okay, this is what we are saying. Hamagia Mitziasa Lachavero. If a person, so he asked the following question, and we had this Gemara in the past, you'll remember. If a person finds an object and he picks up the object not for himself, but to be kind for somebody else, says Rami Bar Chama, he can be makne, he can make a kinyan for his friend. He is not going to benefit from it. Only his friend will benefit from it. But he is allowed to do that. Right? Because if you have a havamina that he cannot be kona it for his chaver, to also zu kamishu menechas al gabi karka, zu kamishu menechas al gabi karka, lo litne loizeh loizeh. So what's he saying here? All right, we're saying the following. We know that a kinyan, one of the ways to make a kinyan is hagbah. What is hagbah? Hagbah is you lift it up and you make a kinyan. So for instance, if I find an object, it's hefker, or we don't know who owns it, and I want to be maknid, I want to be konid, I take it, I pick it up completely intact, and that's my kinyan. That shows that I'm the boss. What's the chiddush here? The chiddush is that if you pick up an object, a talus, whatever, and a part of the talus was trailing and was still on the floor when you picked it up, it was on the ground, you didn't make a kinyan. The kinyan has to be 100% in the air, the whole item, complete, and then you're maknid. If you're not taking the whole item, you're not maknid. So what is this chiddush here? So let's think about this. Rabbi Bar Chama says, Ruvain he sees a talus or any object, and he says, you know what? I know Shimon likes this very much. I'm picking it up and I'm being kind of it for Shimon's benefit. Says Rabbi Bar Chama, 100% you can do it. Because if you can't do it, then when you pick it up, you're not being kind, because you haven't completed the kinyan since you can't do it for somebody else. What does that mean? What's the derivative of that? The derivative of that is when two people come, our Mishnah, and this is where it's going to get complicated. When two people come to Bezdin, and each one says, this is mine. He says it's mine. Clearly, both of them can't own it. They have to own it. Each one has to own part of it. So when I picked it up, I, Reuben, picked it up. Who did I pick it up for? I picked it up for me. If I wasn't allowed to pick it up for me and you, Shimon, then when I picked it up, I never made a kinyan because the Shimon part was still on the ground. You see how we're extrapolating now from this Gemara? If Reuben and Shimon picked it up together, and you're saying, well, Reuben picked it up for himself, Shimon picked it up for himself, but clearly they don't both own it. So Reuben must have picked it up for himself and for Shimon, and Shimon must have picked it up for himself and Reuven. But if you say Reuven can't pick it up for Shimon, then half the talus was still on the ground. And if it was on the ground, Reuven was never kind of his half, because his half is now dependent on Shimon's half. And Shimon's half is now dependent on Reuven's half. And nobody has a whole. Therefore, no one was makneh, and therefore, as Rashi says, someone else is standing there, he rips it out of their hands and picks it up and says, this is mine. I'm the first person to make a kinyan. Go ahead, Jay.
Is there another state here that something is found, he picks it up and says, look, I'm not making any decisions. I'm going to drive over to Shimon's house and ask him whether he's interested or not. And then we'll have a discussion of who owns it. Can he maintain that it's Hefker, even though he's holding on to it in his car as he drives over?
No, but the point here is that Reuven says it's all mine. This is not going to be a negotiation. Reuven says, I found the talus, it's mine. Shimon says, no, I found it, it's mine. So each of them is claiming a whole talus. They come to Bezdin. If we say that in this discussion, that Reuven, when he picks it up, if the halacha is, you can't pick it up for Shimon, you can only pick it up for yourself. So when Reuven picked it up for himself, query, did he own it all? If he didn't own it all because Shimon is claiming the beged, so clearly neither of them owns it all. So if you take the position that Reuven could never have picked it up for himself and for Shimon, and Shimon could never have picked it up for himself and Reuven, then when Reuven picked up the whole talus, he wasn't picking up the whole talus, he was picking up a portion of the talus, and the other part was still on the ground. And that makes his kinyan not valid. And the same with Shimon, because Shimon didn't have in mind Reuven, and if he didn't have in mind Reuven, then Reuven's portion is still on the ground. And Shimon didn't make the entire kinyan. The only way it works, says Rav Acha, says Mara Rav Chama, is if Reuven is allowed to make it for Shimon, and Shimon's allowed to make it for Reuven. So we impute that when Reuven picked it up, he picked up the whole thing, but he had in mind, yeah, it's mine, but it's not mine, it's half Shimon's. And Shimon picked it up and says it's mine, but if it's not mine, I have in mind for Reuven. Then the whole beged was picked up, no problem on kinyan, and we sorted out. Then you're right, Jay, we sorted out, Reuven gets half, Shimon gets a half, but there's a kinyan. We're even worried that there was never a kinyan because it wasn't picked up in total to take it out of the reshus of Hefker to somebody's reshus. Let's take a look at Rashi.
So my question was the Hefker, can't he maintain Hefker even though he picks it up, puts it in his car, drives over to the other one's house, and at that point they start both picking it up or whatever. He takes it out of the car, and then that's when the machlokas starts. Who owns it?
Okay, so in your scenario, in your scenario, they both pick it up, they both go into the same car and go to Bezdin? How does that happen?
The first one transfers his Hefker.
No, 1 second. No, hold on. Reuven and Shimon see a talus on the street.
I had a scenario before they see it together. I was having somebody found it on the street, but he doesn't want to make a kinyan. He doesn't want to decide anything about it yet. He's driving over to his friend's house. Then when it comes there, they both have an argument, and they both pick up the talis together. And that's where the story starts.
Yeah,
Can
but
somebody transfer hefker to another location without having a kinyan and just
but
maintaining it the hefker status?
yeah, but Jay, he automatically made a kinyan the minute he picked it up. The
But he
minute
didn't want to
Reuven saw that talus and he picked it up, he made a kinyan.
But he didn't.
Now he drives over to Shimon and says, Shimon, I found a talus. What's the discussion between Reuven and Shimon now that Reuven picked up the talus from Hefker?
No, but he didn't want to pick it up for himself. He just picked it up to transfer it to another location to then have the discussion about who owns this and that. And in that particular case, they decide that it's Hefker, and they both grab it.
The lost object, it may not have been Hefker at all. There's some technicalities about that also, right?
Right. I mean, we're throwing in all these other technicalities, but assuming Hefker, I'm missing something because when he picked it up, so you're saying that he didn't pick it up for himself, he picked it up for Shimon? What are you saying, Jay? That he found it first, picked it up, went over to Shimon and said, Shimon, I found a talus.
Yeah, what do you think? It doesn't belong to anybody. And then they start arguing, and then they both pick it up together and say, no, it's mine. I found it first, but you brought it to me, and therefore you brought it as Hefker, and it wasn't brought to me as a kinyan.
So let's ride with that for a minute. Okay, fine. Then they go to Bezdin. So they're both holding it in Bezdin, and what are they saying? What are they saying in Bezdin?
That we had a discussion. My friend here brought it over to the house. It was Hefker all the way because he didn't intend to make a kinyan of it.
Okay.
And at my house, we had this dispute, and we both grabbed it. And then we're in front of Bezdin now with the Shnayim Oxen. So my question really is, can somebody transfer, can something that is Hefker be transferred by somebody without that person making a kinyan?
I mean, so what you're saying is, can I pick up an object, I don't want to own it, and I want to do something with it, whatever.
Questions about it. I want to
Yeah, I
find
mean, the short answer is yes. You don't have to be kind of something when you pick it up. You could say, I'm not picking it up to own it. I'm picking it up because it's a Metzia or whatever. So the answer to that is yes. But in your scenario, when you're going to your friend, so that's when Shnayim Oxen starts. It didn't start when he picked it up the first time. Shnayim Oxen is the second time. So let's just play with that. Okay, so Shnayim Oxen the second time. Now for some reason, Reuven lost his generosity, and he says, no, it's mine. And Shimon says, well, you brought it to me, it's mine. So when they're going to Bezdin, let's say that they're bringing Bezdin this machlokes. Okay, fine. Forget about what happened the first time. But l'may nafkamina, because the discussion that we're having in the Gemara here still is valid, because if he's picking it up and he's saying, no, you know what? Reuben says to Shimon, I brought you this talus, but it's really, it's my talus. You know, I thought we would have some discussion. It's really my talus. And Shimon can't say at that point, well, maybe he can, but it gets muddy. But Shimon can say, no, you brought it to me. You were giving it to me. It's my talus. Let's just say that's the argument. It's a little far-fetched, but let's say that's the argument. So they're both coming to Bezdin, and each one is saying that, no, Shimon saying it was meant for me. Reuben says, no, it was meant for me. The underlying issue is, if I picked up the talus, let's say the proper the proper time for making the kinyan was when Reuven brought it to Shimon, not in the very first instance. You still are left with the machlokes as to whether or not Reuven can be kona the whole thing if he doesn't at least have in mind that Shimon gets a part. See, the problem with this issue that we're raising is that if it does all belong to Reuven, the 100%, there's no question Reuven gets it 100%. Vice versa for Shimon. The problem we're facing, no matter when it was picked up, let's just say, whenever it was picked up, the problem is that Bezdin is confronted with two people holding on to a object, each one saying it's mine. Now, so this is where it becomes complicated. It can't belong to both of them 100%. So Bezdin has to make a pshara. They have to say each one gets 50%. But if you own 50%, says the Gemara, says Bezdin, then when you picked it up not only for yourself, but for the other person. You would have had to have picked it up, whether you thought about it or not, you picked it up for the other person. Vice versa, the other guy. If we say that a person cannot, b'shita, b'halacha, a person can't pick it up with someone else in mind, then when he picks this Metzia up, forget about what he thinks. He thinks it's mine 100%. But when he picks it up, you no longer have a proper kinyan, because that kinyan, when both people are holding on to it, requires the mens rea, we call it, the proper thinking that I'm picking it up for myself and for the other guy. If I'm not picking it up for the other guy, then the way the Gemara defines it here, it hasn't been picked up. That's the problem. The problem is if you don't impute that he's thinking of picking it up for himself and the other guy, then it's as if he picked up half a beged, the other fellow picks up half a beged, and la halacha, neither one is koneh because hagbah requires a full beged, and part of the beged was never picked up. Let's look at Rashi. Maybe they'll help us a little bit because it is a complicated thinking. In other words, what does the Mishnah say? Mishnah said that Tanishnayim shehegbia metzia kunuya v'yachloku u'kushemagbia magbia l'das sheyikne bo chaveiro chatzia. So he is picking it up with a mind that his friend, the other fellow, is picking up half of it. Shemamina amagbia metzia ulekame parech diuka de Rabbi Marachama mehecha. Where did he find this? Where did he learn this pshat that we're now saying? So in other words, everything was fine and good. Shnai machzim betalis, you get a half, everybody goes home happy. Rabbi Bar Chama comes and he tells us, wait a minute, Shnai machzim betalis is not that simple. It's not what you think Shnai machzim betalis. In Shnai machzim betalis, you must say that when Reuven picked up the talis, he had Shimon in mind. When Shimon picked up the talis, the Reuven in mind. Rashi says, where did you come up with that theory? Where do you see in the Mishnah such a theory that the one person has the other person in mind? Reuven has himself in mind. Shimon has himself in mind. Why are you saying they have to have each other in mind? And Rabbi Bar Chama says, to asazug kimishumunechas al gabi karka, the zug kimishumunechas al gabi karka, then it's as if he picked up half a beged and left the other half on the floor, and vice versa, right? And we know that a hakbah has to be 100%. Says Rashi, lo yikna lo zeh v'lo zeh v'chol arotzi yadchen miyadam. So you're going to have a scenario where Reuven and Shimon come into Bezdin. This whole scenario unfolds. Bezdin's going to say, you don't own it, and you don't own it. Levi is a spectator in the gallery, and he comes over, takes the talis out of both of their hands, and say, this is my talis, and here's my kinyan, and all of a sudden, Levi's the owner, because neither Reuven nor Shimon made a proper kinyan when they picked it up, and Levi's going to come and make a kinyan, and he'll be the owner. It's absurd, right? It doesn't make sense, but that's what Rabbi Bar Chama is saying. If you say that I can't pick it up for him and he can't pick it up for me, this is the scenario. Someone else is going to come and chapois the talis and become the owner of the talis, and that can't be. So that's how he's backing into his theory. We'll stop here because it gets very interesting and complicated, but at least we now know the theory. The theory is that when a person comes and grabs a talis, another person grabs a talis, the only way Shnayim Ochsen can work, according to Rabbi Bar Chama, he's not the final decider here. But according to Rami Bar Chama, the only way it can work is if each one has the right to pick it up for his friend. Not that he wants to, but he has the right. So if each one has the right, so we impute that when he picked up the talis and the Bezdin says you get a half, that the other half was meant for Shimon, and Shimon was meant for Reuven. Therefore, when they picked it up, they made a proper kinyan, the two of them together. You can make a kinyan together, and each one gets a half a talis. That's the chiddush, and that's why Rashi says, where does this come from, Rami Bar Chama? And Rashi says, look, later on, it's actually a Gemara later on. The Gemara later on will help us understand what Rami Bar Chama means with this. So that, again, interesting, very complicated theory, but yet the Gemara says that can work. All right, so all right, we'll leave it there. We touched on something, and Mitzvah Shem, next week we'll pick it up. Yeshikayach to everybody.
Have a good Father's Day. And
Happy Father's Day, everybody. And Mazel Tov, Scott, on your bar mitzvah next week.
All right,
Mazel
thank you.
So is the Zoom going to be all we have to do is just click on next week? No
Yeah,
change?
I'll send out an email. It'll be, all you have to do is click on it. You're going to be fine. Just realize you can't look at an old email. That one
okay.
would not connect you.
Okay, then we're fine.
Yep.
Sag gesund, Shkayach.
Okay.